All right, everybody, this is Chapter 8, Topic 2. We're almost done with the entire set of material. We only have a couple topics to go, and we'll start reviewing for the exam. Okay. So, energy flow through ecosystems is what we're going to talk about today. Most people have probably seen a smattering of this in basic biology or in junior high ecology type class. So most of this is familiar, but we're probably going to build on it a little bit more advanced level than what you're used to. So you're probably familiar, but there may be some additional depth to it that you haven't seen before. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay. Everybody probably knows what an ecosystem is. That is pretty much all the living things and the stuff they mess with. Okay? So, if I took some sort of bird, let's just say a cardinal out in the woods behind the school, that would be a component of that ecosystem. But so would the tree that it maybe interacts with, maybe it builds a nest in. But other things out there would be part of that ecosystem too, like the soil, the water, the atmosphere. Some of them are alive, and some of them are not. So keep in mind that we count both of them, and we call those biotic and abiotic factors, and it should be really easy for people of your training and education to know the difference between those two words. Biotic is living or once living, so like a rotten log is still biotic, okay? Abiotic are all the physical and chemical properties of the environment. That could just be like the latitude and longitude. That is a abiotic factor. What happens as you go south? That abiotic factor changes to a more gentle climate, okay? What happens when you go north? Winters get longer, weather gets more. So that could be a stream, a lake. It could be the minerals in the soil. It could be the slope of the land, okay? Central Ohio is very flat, but as you go to other parts of the country and other parts of the state, we get hills and things like that. So it can be a lot of things, okay? Just one little practice question. Somewhere in your notes, write down 3 biotic factors and 3 abiotic factors. You ever play categories? What happens in categories when the other player wrote the same thing you did? Doesn't count. Let's try to do a little categories. Write at least 3, but try to come up with some that you don't think anybody else will get. You don't have to see it, okay? You can assume that it's there. Like, I can't see the atmosphere, but I'm guessing it's about 20% oxygen out there. Let's category this, okay? I'm going to pause the recording while I give you time to do that. If you're watching this, you can pause the video. Start my recording. All right, we're back with you. We're talking about entropy. We went through and listed tons of different biotic and abiotic factors. But as we move through the environment, just review first and second law of thermodynamics, which are going to be important for how energy moves through ecosystems. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Looks like everybody's ready. Okay. So if there is a net gain, okay, you guys remember what the difference between net and gross is? If I make $10 an hour and I work for 10 hours, what's my gross pay? That's $100. My net pay is what happens after I pay all my taxes, okay? So the net is all the pluses and minuses, okay? Any net gain in energy means that it's either going to be stored or it's going to grow somehow. Okay? If you're a human being and you burn as many calories as you use, are you going to gain weight, lose weight, or stay the same? Stay the same. Okay? So if you want to maintain your weight, your net calorie intake should be equal to your calorie burn for 0. Okay? What happens if you eat more than you burn? You get bigger. So that means you're going to be storing energy, right? Okay? If you have teenagers in the house, sometimes they tend to eat a lot because they're growing. Newborn babies, they grow like crazy. All they do is eat, sleep, and poop. All right. So listen, a net loss of energy is going to give you a loss of mass, and if I cut off all the energy, you'll eventually starve to death. I can do this slowly by just cutting off your food for your metabolism, or I can do it really quickly by cutting off your oxygen so you can't burn the energy that you have stored. Okay? So, metabolic rate. This is the amount of energy an animal or plant uses over a period of time. Usually measured in calories, but we can look at things like heat loss, oxygen consumed, or CO2 produced. Okay? Have you ever seen these videos of them doing research on athletes? They'll put them on a treadmill and they'll be breathing through a hose. Anybody ever seen that sort of thing? They're basically trying to measure how much energy they're burning while they're running. So in animals and plants undergo respiration too. Oxygen is used, CO2 is produced. Everybody knows this, guys. But as biologists, you can measure the amount of oxygen used or the amount of CO2 given off through either devices or lab processes, and we can compute how many calories you're burning. You know this. What happens to your respiration rate when you go out and start running around and doing some cardio? It goes up, right? Or you can try to be cool when you walk up the steps and be like, I'm not out of breath, right? And you're dying of oxygen on the inside while you're trying to look tough. All right. Now, animals that have a higher metabolic rate tend to be smaller, okay? Animals that have a lower metabolic rate tend to be larger. Now, you all know I grew up on a farm, and metabolic rate is very, very important to farmers, okay? If I had 100 pounds of chickens, live chickens, and then I had one pig that weighed 100 pounds, which one will go through more animal feed in a week if I'm feeding them the same stuff? Read those last two slides.
No, the pig will.
No, it will not.
Yes. I mean, in my entire life, there's no way that you can
The same mass of chickens.
Yeah, even the same mass.
They do. I'm telling you, they do.
If they're Cornish cross, then yeah. If not, then no.
I won't argue with you, but smaller animals use way more energy per unit of mass than larger animals, okay? And Justin doesn't believe me, and that's fine, but farmers often call pigs mortgage lifters because they grow so cheaply compared to smaller animals, okay? So you can feed a pig a lot less for the same amount of growth, okay? So you have to be aware of this stuff as a biologist. Okay, if you have mice, very, very high metabolic rate, they have a higher body temperature, versus something like a dog has a lower metabolic rate. Small animals typically have a very high metabolic rate, and it doesn't seem like they eat more because they're smaller, but they eat more per pound or more per mass. All right? They are not going to eat as much calories as something like a squirrel. So if I had a 500-pound lion and then 1,000 squirrels that weighed 500 pounds, I would have to feed the squirrels way more than the lions. Okay? All right. So we're going to say this is true, but why? Okay, why do you think that's true? It can't store as much energy. What else? What else might be on your mind? Some of them are, but you guys are on the right track, okay? But this is a really broad rule. It doesn't really like, oh, it's only prey, it's only predators. Are there small predators? Are there very, very, very small predators? Yeah, so it's not necessarily completely. That's what that is a rule, but why is that so? Yeah, I'm talking about like the individual level. If I have 1,000 squirrels that weigh 500 pounds total, and I have one lion that weighs 500 pounds total, don't think about what they're eating. Just think about the energy in what they're eating. It takes way more to keep the squirrels alive because they have a high metabolism than it does to keep the lion alive. Yes, small animals usually have a much faster heart rate too. Yeah, remember their heart is smaller too, so yeah. They do, yep. Generally. If you're a 80-pound, 99-year-old woman, it might not be as much as an 80-pound fifth grader, but generally. All right. There are lots of reasons why, but one of the main reasons why is a small container doesn't have as many places for chemical reactions to take place. So there's more entropy in that smaller container. They lose heat faster. Okay, they lose heat faster. If you're a big person, you typically can stay warmer in the environment. Okay, so they're way more susceptible to changes in the environment when they're small. So it's their small container. There's not as much volume for all those chemical reactions to happen, and that has an effect, and how much they exchange temperature with the environment is also comes into play. Okay? All right. So you've probably heard this explained with different words. How many of you have heard of like mammals are warm-blooded, reptiles are cold-blooded? That's what this is right here. Okay? Warm-blooded is what an endotherm is. So in parentheses somewhere write warm-blooded. And ectotherms are things that use external sources to regulate their body temperature. All right, name groups of animals that are endotherms. And birds. Yep. Okay. Mammals and birds. Now, there are some members of other families of life that can do some endothermic activity. There are moths that can do it. There are moths that will vibrate their wings really fast without flying, and that's the equivalent of shivering for you. Okay? There are insects like bees that will flap their wings to cool down the beehive. Okay? So there are ectotherms that have some adaptations to do a little bit of endothermic action, but in general, most endotherms that we know of are, hey, would you shut that door, Diane? Most endotherms that we know of are mammals and birds. Mammals and birds, okay? There's some debate about were dinosaurs endotherms. That's still up for debate. Okay. So what do we see ectotherms do to regulate body temperature? Sun themselves, okay, or they get out of the sun, okay, so or they'll use they also drop to the temperature of the environment. They just sort of shut their metabolism down, okay? So you don't see alligators moving very quickly when it's really, really cold out. All right. How many of you have seen something similar to this before? Trophic levels. Okay. Okay. Yeah, only 10% of energy makes it to the next level in general. Very general terms. Okay. We also like to put, in terms of ecology, species into trophic levels. Troph means to eat, okay? Based on what their main source of nutrition and energy is, okay? Your primary producers are all of your green plants, okay? And they are powered directly by the sun. They are the limiting factor for how much energy comes into a system. Unless you're going to bring it in through some human intervention, they are the limiting factor. So if you have a zoo, you have to bring the food in, okay? If you have a really, really, really big zoo, you might be able to grow enough grass for those animals to eat with the local resources. Now, because we're talking about ecology, we're not going to talk about human-made structures, okay? So if we look out the window, our primary producers are things out there like the grass, the trees, and the shrubs, and so on, okay? If you go out to the ocean, your primary producers are things like phytoplankton, okay? There's some plankton that's not plant-based, but it just depends on where you are. Then your primary consumers, what are those going to be? Your whativores, herbivores, your things that eat plants. Name common non-agricultural herbivores of Ohio. Insects eat plants. What else? Rabbits, I hear. Deer. Squirrels, they eat seeds. So there's lots of them out there. Okay? So next we have your secondary consumers. Name some secondary consumers of Ohio. Students? Oh, humans. Let's try to leave humans out of it. Coyotes would be a good one. They might straddle second and third. Snakes that would eat what? Rats, mice, what baby birds, whatever.
Your secondary consumer could even be a rabbit.
So yeah, sometimes they kind of straddle the levels, but they mainly stick in one group. Would you say? Raccoons, they eat everything. Okay. What would be a third level consumer in Ohio? A bird of prey, very, very good. And then some sort of apex predator in Ohio. They're coming back, but things like bobcats, okay, things like bears aren't found in Ohio as much anymore.
Humans,
Well, I'm trying to avoid humans, but yes.
we are there.
Humans are like almost the same except for primary.
Yeah, we do. We found ways to get energy out of everything. Okay, name a couple decomposers from Ohio. Fungi. What? Bacteria. What about animal level decomposer? Termites. I like that. Vultures. Okay. Roly-polies because they eat leaf litter. Very good. Very good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to ask you some thought questions. Why can't I go to the grocery store and buy lion and bear meat? Correct. You're like the first person who's ever got that like right off the bat. And I've been asking that question for like 20 years. Most people are like, oh, because they kill you when you raise them, which is fair enough. But
Certain looks are vegan, actually.
well, let's not get into the way the meat tastes. Let's not get into the cultural stuff either. Okay? Are there hunters that kill these things and eat them? Sure. Okay? So, Fizz is exactly right. If I was going to raise bears for you to eat on an agricultural level, what would I have to do? I'd have to get a huge amount of land, raise sheep or goats or something, and kill them and feed it to the bear. Okay? So what would be the price of bear meat compared to like other primary consumers? It would be a huge factor more. Okay? How many of you, what was the movie that was real popular on Netflix when the pandemic started, the guy with the tigers? Tiger King. Remember how they were kind of like, how do you get all the meat to feed the, like running a predator or apex predator operation is very, very expensive because you have to feed them primary consumers that are fed by primary producers. So if you're going to be a bear farmer, you have to grow grains and grasses to feed some primary consumer, and then you have to kill the primary consumers and feed it to the secondary, tertiary, or apex. Okay? Now, this point I'm making is a really good way to illustrate that as you go up this pyramid, what happens to energy? What are these percents on here? Like primary producers, they make 100% of the energy. The primary consumers only get 10% of the energy out of the primary producers. So if a rabbit goes around eating grass, it really only can metabolize 10% of that energy. Why? It takes energy for it to actually digest it. It takes energy for it to avoid predators and prey as it's moving around. Okay? So in ecosystems, we have to really pay attention to this. What does that tell us about the amount of habitat that a apex predator needs? If I'm a hawk or a lion or a tiger, how much range do I need to go out and hunt all these other? A lot, okay? As we go up, Why can't there be like thousands of lions out there in one little area? Everything else would die. There are not enough primary, secondary, and tertiary level things for it to eat. Okay? So if we look out the window, we see green plants everywhere. Okay? I look out this window a lot, and every once in a while I'll see some sort of primary consumer. I don't see that like millions of birds out there or thousands of squirrels. I'll see a deer run by every once in a while. So just comparing the biomass of each of these levels, it usually gets smaller, and it takes a whole bunch of grass to support, just think about this, it takes a whole bunch of grass to support the things that the top things eat. Okay? Now I'm saying the word grass because that's what I look out here and see, but it could be leaves, tree nuts, roots, vegetables, sap, nectar, anything you can get from a plant. Okay? Or you have to feed them hay. You're exactly right. Okay, a lot of people like animals. They buy them. They don't have enough land, and you see some skinny horses out there. Okay. So, what was I going to say? I just lost my train of thought. That's okay. So think about what you're saying over there. Think about the geography of what meats people eat in certain parts of the world. Okay? In North America, we really like beef, and we really like pigs, and we really like chicken. Okay? We have really good agricultural land in North America. So we can raise a cow on about 1 acre of grass, but we'll have to supplement that in the winter. Okay? What are some meats that are really popular in other parts of the world that don't have the greatest grass and agricultural land? Lamb and goats. They can get way more calories out of their environment on crappier, lower quality grasses, okay? If you think about it from an agricultural point of view, not from all grasses are equal ecologically, but they're able to more easily extract calories out of the environment, okay? So agriculturally, when you look around at the species that people choose to eat, it's usually ones that are very efficient, okay, at converting grass into food, okay? Let me ask you one more question. Why is cheese so popular in Wisconsin? They got a lot of cows. Why do they have a lot of cows compared to corn? They have a lot of land that's easier to grow grass on than it is to grow crops on, okay? Before refrigeration, what did you do if you had too much milk? You preserve it. How do you preserve milk? Make it into cheese. So when you look at areas of the world and you're like, wow, they eat a lot of cheese. It's not just like those people must like cheese, okay? There are like ecological reasons that you eat what you eat. Now, we live in a world right now where I can go to the grocery store and pick out fruit from pretty much any continent, all seasons of the year. Okay, it wasn't always like that. It used to be like in summer you eat tomatoes. Okay, in winter you eat potatoes. All right, because they are easy to. Now we preserve stuff, ship stuff very quickly, and if you get into agriculture or food preparation, there are certain times of year that foods are the best, and chefs know what those are, and I don't know, I'm getting off topic, but anyway, okay. So, mass can be recycled, okay? So when you go get a drink of water or drink something that has water in it, I guarantee you that water has been in other living things. Some of you are like, yeah, right? So energy has to recycle through. I'm sorry, mass has to recycle through. Energy can't be recycled. Once you spend it, entropy makes it disorganized and harder to use. Okay? If you can't read this green thing here, it says energy lost as heat. All right. I'm going to go through these really quick. Primary producers are things that do photosynthesis. There are some, not very many, that are chemosynthetic. They usually live around hydrothermal vents or in hot springs. Pretty rare. Some bacteria can do this. All right. I'm going to try to go through these a little fast because I think you know them. Has anyone seen these like funny pictures going around of people wearing a backpack with a plant in it connected to a hose? Like it's a pandemic joke? Like, who has seen that? Some, yeah, I haven't seen it for real, but I've seen pictures of people wearing these backpacks. It takes a lot of plants to give you that much, enough air to live off of. Not like a house plant in a backpack. I'll try to find one after we're done. All right. Heterotrophs. Hetero means other, and if you're not an autotroph, you're a heterotroph. Okay? And we're going to divide the heterotrophs into these levels we talked about. Your primary consumers, your plant eaters, pretty much your vegans. They are your herbivores. They only eat plants. And then we've talked about examples. We've talked about this quite a bit. So I'm just going to kind of let you get this into your notes, and then we'll move on. Usually when we classify these things, we talk about where they mainly get their calories from, okay? Would it be unusual to maybe see a coyote drag away some roadkill and eat it? No, that wouldn't be unusual, but we don't really think of them as decomposers. So don't try to, like, human beings, we like to put everything into one category, but biology's too sloppy for that. Things live in multiple categories. And be careful about putting an entire group into one thing. Like birds are primary consumers. Not always. There's birds that eat other birds. Okay? I saw this video on one of my social media. It was a pelican that swallowed a seagull. Just walked up to it and swallowed it whole. Pretty intense. All right. Everybody good? Everybody say, wait, I'm moving on. So they call this structure the trophic structure, okay? And you have food chains and food webs. They are slightly different, okay? A food chain, most chains, if I put a gold chain around my neck, it's usually like one strand, right? Okay? If I use a chain to like tow my truck around, it's usually one strand, okay? So a food chain is shown here on the right. A food web would be like adding more branches. You put arrows on these that show which way the energy is going. Okay. We usually try to take them from the bottom to the top. Here's a chain. Pretty easy stuff. Pretty cartoony, but it gets the job done for teaching. Okay. Let's talk about this from a little more advanced level. If we go in and we start changing the availability of energy in an ecosystem, it will disrupt them. Okay? If you go out there and you turn a prairie into a parking lot in a shopping mall, you're going to remove energy from that ecosystem, and it's going to have an effect on that local area. If you have plants that no animals want to eat outcompete the other plants, it's going to change that ecosystem. It's going to disrupt it. Now, the most profound changes come from changing the producers, okay? If we go out and we wipe out all the primary producers in an area, we could have ecosystem collapse, okay? We've seen this with rivers that get heavily polluted where there's almost nothing living in it. It happened in Cleveland at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Yes. So much pollution in the river it caught on fire. It's not the only place it happened, but okay. Now we're going to start getting a little more technical, okay? When we talk about primary production, we're talking about the amount of light energy that can be converted to chemical energy, okay? Your primary producers set the budget for the entire ecosystem. Now, let's go back to agriculture. If I'm going to grow calories for me or my animals to eat, how do you think I feel about their primary production? What kind of plants do you think humans just happen to plant the most of? Ones that have really good primary production. Corn is one of the most efficient convert sunlight and carbon into food plants out there. Okay? There are others that are really good at it, but for this area, it's one that gets you the most calories for the inputs. Okay? Most of the calories that the human population eats comes from grasses and rice. Wheat, oats, corn are all in the grass family. So what would happen if some terrible virus attacked all the grasses of the world? We'd be switching over to rice pretty hard, okay? No more cornflakes. No more bread. No more tacos. All right. So there are different ways to measure this, but what you're going to take equation-wise is gross primary productivity might be, this is the amount of glucose plants make, okay? The net primary productivity is they use some of that glucose to grow, okay? So gross and net, you got to know the difference between those. Does a plant just grow so someone can eat it? No, it grows for its own needs and its own purposes, okay? Now, agriculture, we have tricked these plants into being like the maximum productivity, okay? Primary production is largely dependent upon what? What do you see here? Where are the most productive areas in the world? South of here, but by the equator, okay? What biome is found in those dark green areas? Okay, there's a lot of rainforest in there, warm, it's humid. Then you have desert belts above and below the equatorial regions, okay? And then you get into more temperate areas, okay? And a lot of this has to do with prevailing weather patterns. Like most of Australia is a desert, but in the southern hemisphere, a lot of rain comes off and just hits that one side of Australia. So Australia has pretty bad productivity, except on that east coast there. Almost all these areas are rainforest biome, tropical, long growing season, all year round. Then you've got deserts, okay? And then you've got your northern and southern latitudes. So latitude is directly related to primary production. As you go farther away from the equator, except for some extenuating circumstances, primary production is decreasing, okay? Now, what this doesn't show is the productivity of the oceans. Ocean productivity is related to something called upwelling, okay? Ocean productivity is really high where currents lift all the nutrients that falls out of the sea from things dying up to the surface where phytoplankton can use it and create the basis of that food chain. Some of the richest productivity areas in the ocean are off the west coast of South America, and they are red hot because so much water moves towards South America. When it hits the continental shelf, it goes up, and that's very productive around there. So some of the best fisheries in the world are down there off the west coast of South America. Okay, we talked about this. We talked about why. There's more sunlight, there's more water in those areas. Growing season is all year round. Okay. Secondary production is the amount of chemical energy that consumers convert into new biomass. Okay? You have to feed these grasshoppers a lot of grass to get them to grow to that size. This is showing that every jump through the trophic levels, only 10% of the energy gets to the next.
Yeah, I see that, but like,
Why is that so?
So no. So like the phytoplankton is 1 million kilograms, and then grass is 5%.
The amounts we chose are arbitrary.
Oh, okay.
The percents are about the same.
Okay, never mind. I was confused. I didn't know if there was
It would have been better to, yeah.
No,
Good question, though. There are some things that are better than this at others. Okay, I think some of the most efficient plants are like sugar beets and sugar cane. All right. So, when we take a look at the entire ecosphere of the planet, there's a limited amount of oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus and carbon that's usable to life on Earth. Okay? You can't drill down 100 miles into the planet and take it out. I mean, humans could do that, but I don't know if we can go 100 miles. But we're limited to what's chemically available on the surface of the Earth. Okay? And by chemically available, is gasoline full of energy and full of organic compounds? Yes. Okay? It's full of hydrogen and carbon. You can't drink gasoline and get energy out of it. So it's not truly chemically available to you. Okay? You can't eat a lump of coal and say, well, that's my calories for the day. So it has to be chemically available. Okay? So there are various biochemical cycles in the environment that contain both biotic and abiotic elements, and different things cycle through. These are some of the big ones, okay? You guys have probably seen that big jar I have over there. It's been sealed since 2013. I probably need to open it up and refresh it. It's its own ecosystem. Sunlight can come in, but no energy can come or go. When I first set it up, there were snails crawling around in there. They lasted several years. I don't see them anymore. Okay? What's happening is the biochemical matter cycling in that thing is collapsing. The only things probably left in there are some bacteria and algae. Okay? At first, there was enough matter in there that it could cycle. But after a while, the cycles in that jar broke down because it's too small. Okay? So small environments are very hard to maintain. So if I was going to make a space station that traveled, I don't know, for 100 years, it would probably collapse without some very complex environmental engineering. So we can keep a few people alive in a space station, but we constantly have to send pizza up for them to eat. Okay? Not going to grow their own food anytime soon in the International Space Station. They might grow a few leaves of basil to put on the pizza we deliver, but that's about it. All right, this is probably the easiest one to understand, the water cycle, because everybody learns this in middle school. Water is pretty much essential for everything that's alive. And water cycles through the ecosystem. You take water in, you urinate it out, it re-enters the environment, it evaporates, it rains on you again. Now, there's geologic water that's locked down in the Earth's crust. Anybody know how that water re-enters the atmosphere? It does. The oceanic crust on the bottom of the ocean is full of water. The rocks are full of water. They subduct underneath the continental shelf, and what do they come back out as? Close. Special mountains. Stuff comes out of them.
Oh,
Volcanoes. It's called connate water, if anybody cares. So we have groundwater that we pull out. Wells, we can pull the water out. Springs, sometimes it comes out naturally. We've got precipitation, we've got lakes, we've got oceans, we've got rivers. Plants exhale water. You know how in the middle of July in Ohio you go outside and you're like, I can feel the humidity. That's all plant respiration.
I was thinking about the place called this.
That's, I can't remember what that was called. One of them subducting under the other. Converging, diverging, subduction. All right, the carbon cycle is a lot more complex. We don't have to get down to every little detail of it here, but how are you participating in the carbon cycle right now? Breathing. What are you you're exhaling what? Where did the carbon come from? You know, where's the carbon you exhale directly come from? Anybody remember the cellular respiration formula? What do you break down? Starts with a glue? Yes, okay. So the sugars that you have eaten, you're now exhaling sugar gas, okay? Their body breaks down starches. Yeah, the keto diet. The keto diet can give you really, really bad breath.
You're eating cheese.
Cheese is wonderful. What are you talking about?
This is not wonderful for you.
Yeah, when you make a sandwich that has buns made out of lettuce.
Lettuce wraps, they're good.
It works.
Hey, it works. It's not sustainable for a
It's not
lifetime.
sustainable, but it does work in the short term.
There's lots of nutritional arguments out there.
You're not supposed to do the keto diet for more than like a couple of months. Because it's not good for your body.
I think it causes kidney stones too.
Oh,
All right. Carbon can get locked up in lots of things, okay? Dead plants can be compacted geologically, and we can get things like coal. Dead marine life, we can get things like oil. Carbon is locked up in the trees out there. If we wanted to remove all this extra carbon out of the atmosphere, we have got to start planting trees like crazy. People are saying we can't plant trees fast enough to pull the carbon out of the atmosphere. Yeah.
Question. Why does the city of Lebanon every 5 years rip up all the saplings on our road past the school and replace them with smaller, tiny ones?
I don't know.
They don't let them go.
I don't know. A guy I went to high school with, he is a urban forestry expert. I could ask him. He'll know what trees you should plant where in your backyard and all this other stuff.
Well, it just seems like a waste because they don't even really grow and it's now.
But you can pick a species that doesn't grow big.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I don't know the answer to that.
They let some of them get really good, but others.
All right, we're almost done, guys, and you deserve a break. Nitrogen cycle, way more complex. Nitrogen in the atmosphere is unusable by you. What do you need nitrogen to make? It says it up there. Proteins, nucleic acids. You can't just suck nitrogen out of the air when you inhale, and your body cannot use it. We have to have bacteria turn this nitrogen into diatomic nitrogen. It's very inert. It doesn't react. You can get your tires filled with this nitrogen instead of plain old air because it doesn't expand and contract as much in the cold. But bacteria will make N2 and some plants into ammonia or nitrates and nitrites, okay? That can be used by plants. When you go out and fertilize your lawn to make it nice and green, you're putting not N2 on, but NO3 and NO2. That can be used by plants. Listen to this. What makes more nitrogen now? All of the world's bacteria or human beings making fertilizer? Human beings make more nitrogen than all the bacteria on the earth combined. That's kind of scary. It's called the Haber process. A lot of people argue that agriculture in the modern sense, all we're doing is turning oil into food. You use the energy in the oil to make nitrogen, then you use tractors and stuff to move the food around. We run out of oil, it's going to be bad. There's a lot of things you can't make that are just gasoline and diesel fuel. All right. The phosphorus cycle. Another limiting factor with how much productivity there is in an area is how much phosphorus is free. Phosphorus is another main component of fertilizer that you put on your garden and your lawn. Okay? If you don't have enough phosphorus, it can be like no more plants can grow. Usually in an environment, there's some limiting factor. Water, sunlight, nitrogen, phosphorus are some of the big ones. Life will go to the max until one of those runs out. Phosphorus can get locked up in rocks. So we can mine that out of the ground. There was a place in Florida where a phosphate mine collapsed and released a bunch of radioactive material into the air just in the last month. They had to evacuate the whole area from radiation in the rocks, escaping the mine. Scary stuff. If farmers put too much fertilizer down, it can run off into the lakes and you can get an explosion of plants that suck up all the nutrients and then everything else dies. It happens in Ohio every once in a while. Up by Toledo, there's a big lake. They put too much fertilizer down, it all runs into the lake. The plants explode and everything else it dies off because all the nutrients get locked up in the plants.
Is that when like they say like you can't use the water anymore? Or is that
That's usually just from water breaks and they're worried bacteria is in it. So, but the area of Ohio that happened, they pulled their water out of these lakes and they had some really bad problems. They had to like truck water in. A lot of people think that water is going to be a resource that we fight over and sell, and it's going to become like a new oil or a new commodity. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there. Let me stop the recording.